Now look, I've showed this.
Okay, I'm going to call the Tuesday, January 21st, 2025 regular session of council to order. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Griora.
Here.
Mrs. Cray.
Here.
Mr. Moran.
Here.
Mr. Dunman.
Here.
Ms. Gersh.
We all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, good and welfare. I'd like to take a moment of silence. We've had a passing of a resident recently, as well as an individual whose children participated in our youth sports some years ago. Howie Combs of Cowga Heights passed away recently, as well as Tim Howard. So if we could take a brief moment of silence in memory of their passing. And Nancy Davis as well. Thank you. Brief moment of silence, please. Thank you. The presentation by the Cowga County Board of Development and Disabilities has been moved to next month, so we're going to remove that from the agenda. I don't think we need a motion to do anything with that. We're good. So we are going to remove that from the agenda. I do want to remind department heads and council members, we are live now on the village's new YouTube channel, so that you do not need to have a membership to Facebook or whatnot. You can simply go to YouTube and watch council meetings live. So if you are speaking, click your mic or get a mic and click it and make sure it's on when you're speaking. The cameras are set up to follow who's speaking. So whoever's watching on the interwebs will be able to see who it is making the statements they're making. With that, I'd like a motion to this for the discussion of personnel issues for executive session.
So moved.
Second. Actually, can we read the whole motion that's on the agenda?
I make a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussion of personnel issues to consider appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official, pending potential litigation and property acquisitions if necessary.
So moved. Second. Moved and seconded. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Griora.
Yes.
Mrs. Cray. Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Okay, so council is going to get up with legal counsel and the fiscal officer. We're going to go to the conference room. Mingle amongst yourselves. You're on camera. We'll be back in a few minutes. Janet, we'll come and get you. Can I have a motion to resume regular session?
So moved.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Griora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
A motion for the approval of the January 7th, 2025 special session of council meeting minutes. So moved.
Second, I do have one comment. There was a scrivener's error on the minutes regarding a vote that was taken. I did make that correction. Council should have that corrected page number, and the minutes are good to go right now.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Meeting minutes are approved. Okay, council has before them ordinance 2025-01 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. This is the budget, the appropriations ordinance. Council, I am going to, like I do every year, spend some time going through the spreadsheets that we have and we use to develop the budget. The first one that I'm going to go through is this one with the yellow on it. It's the revenue budget. You good? Everybody good? Council? Okay. As you can see, I've left the actual revenue of the past 3 years on the spreadsheet so you can see it. It actually, I've got this data dating all the way back to 2007 when I took over as fiscal officer. So we've carried this forward year after year after year. The key column to look at is the right hand, all the way on the right, the 2025 estimated. I'm going to go through the revenue relatively quickly. In the first top section of lines, you're going to see under the account description, you'll see real estate, that is taxes, that is property taxes. Property taxes is divided into about 4 different pools. When you get your property tax bill from the county and it says you owe, I'm just throwing numbers out here, you owe the county $2,000 for property taxes. Only about 20% of that dollar amount on your personal home's property taxes comes to the village of Newburgh Heights. The rest of it goes to Cleveland Schools, Cuyahoga County, the Metro Parks, the public library, and a host of other institutions. But only about 20% of the total property taxes collected in Newburgh Heights come to the village of Newburgh Heights. So of those property taxes that we do get, they are divided into 4 different categories: general fund, police pension, which is a very small percentage, police department, and fire department. That's what your local property taxes pay for. The general fund estimate this year is about $104,000, which will be up about $20,000 from last year. So despite our property tax rate going up pretty considerably, the village is not generating this giant windfall from the county reassessment process that occurred, which was dictated to the county by the state of Ohio. This is not something that anybody up here did. It's not something anybody at the county did. These rules are outlined by the state of Ohio. Now, what we are fortunate of is because of our aggressive position in maintaining our housing stock in the past decade, we actually have the highest rate of property value growth as a percentage in the county. So that is a testament to the work we've done to try and preserve this neighborhood. Income taxes, we'll have about, we simply took an estimate of the last few years. It's never a guarantee, but we're almost $900,000 in income taxes, 898,000. And then we get a return from Rita. It's the difference of how much it actually costs them to collect versus the percentage they charge us. It'll be about 20 grand we get back, 19,000. The next section down is revenue we get from the state. We get about $150 in cigarette taxes, about $1,600 in beer and liquor license taxes. And we will get something called property tax rollback. We'll get about $11,000, $10,925, or somewhere in that neighborhood. That's something the state gives us back because they give an exemption to senior citizens for their property. Next section down, we'll get about $4,000 in revenue from kids signing up for athletic programs and sports, that kind of thing. We will get about $45,000 in revenue from the $1. Excuse me, this is the revenue we get from the Rumpke transfer station behind White Dove. So every time a truck drives down there and dumps stuff in there, they have to pay a fee. The state sets that fee. We cannot control it. I want to say it's 25 cents per ton or something like that. But we get about $45,000 a year in revenue from that facility. And then other charges for service, this is always a guesstimate. This could be somebody drives into a telephone pole and their insurance company has to pay us money to fix that telephone pole. It ends up in this pot of money. So we really never know how much is going to be in here, but it's thankfully a very small part of our budget. But that's what makes up that dollar amount. Next section down is the fines and waivers. The police department itself, from traditional traffic and law enforcement activities, generates about $155,000 a year. Traffic cameras will generate, conservatively, we believe will generate about $7 million in 2025. 7,081,000 is our estimate. And then the building department will generate about $60,000 this year. However, the number you'll see in there is 120,000. And the reason it's 120 is because we did not make the transfer from 2024 into the general bank account because we are dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's to make sure the vacancy that existed over the last, at the end of 23 and even a little bit prior to that, for the state auditors, which will be visiting us this year, is what it's supposed to be. So we can track everything back to where it's supposed to be, how much it's supposed to be, et cetera. So we expect that number to be 120,000 in 25, even though half of that revenue is from last year. Next section down, you'll see interest. We generate about $20,000 in interest on the money that we do have in the bank. The vast majority of that interest is the money that's sitting in the bond fund to pay for this building. Miscellaneous receipts will generate about $100,000. Again, this comes from a whole host of avenues. It's kind of a catch-all fund. And then employee copay is it's $72,000. It's kind of a net neutral. It's not a plus. What happens is we pay for medical care coverage, dental, vision, and standard health care. The employee's portion of that is 15%. So they have to pay us. So if your monthly healthcare bill is $1,000, that employee will have $150 deducted from their payroll to cover their medical care. That's the only cost our employees have. Co-pays, office visits, things like that, we reimburse the employees. So they don't have any cost outside of that initial 15% of their check. So general fund revenue, it's the green line, top third of the second page. General fund revenue is estimated to be about $8.64 million in 2025. I'm going to go very quickly through these next batches of money. The 201 to 202 funds, those are chunks of money we get from things like gasoline taxes and things like that that come from the state and the county. They don't fluctuate much each year. The 201 fund will be about 96,000. The 202 fund will be roughly $8,000. It might be 8,100. It might be 7,600. It's somewhere in that neighborhood. The 205 fund, despite it being called the CDBG fund, is really the fund that we use to process all of our grants. This is where the money comes from. The vast majority is the money that Jim spends a significant amount of his time getting from the sewer district, from the water department, from the county, from the state, from various sources to fund so much infrastructure work that we've done in the past decade or so. To the section 2010 or 210 rather is same thing. It's motor vehicle levy tax. We get a portion of the cost of the registrations of the vehicles that occur for people that own vehicles in Newburgh Heights. Next section down, you'll see is 213. It says real estate county all the way, almost the last line on that page. That's another small section of property taxes. That's what's used for police pension. Middle of the next page, 281 fund. That's the police property tax fund. That generates about $264,000. For the general public's sake, property taxes only pay for about a quarter, slightly less than a quarter of the total cost of operating our police department. Actually, probably about 12% this year. Next page, you're going to get to the 292 fund. This is all revenue now. Same thing. The 292 fund is the fire department. You'll see about $260,000 in property tax revenue, $34,000 in property tax rollback. That's money the state gives us. So property taxes generate about $294,000 for the fire department. Then you'll see $1 million, slightly more than $1 million transfer to the fire department. That's revenue that we have to take out of the general fund and transfer to the fire department for payroll, salaries, operations, things like that, to make sure that we fully fund and can operate to the best of our ability the fire department with the staffing levels that we need. That's the 292 fund. The 293 fund is when Chief Higgs goes out, the ambulance runs out and they respond to a motorist that's on the highway. The motorist has to have medical care. The insurance company pays for that medical care. The insurance company pays that to us. That's what this money is. We actually pay a firm that Chief Higgs reports to and works with on a is it monthly or weekly basis? You run they send run reports, and then that firm goes to the insurance company and says, "Hey, you owe us money." We do not charge our residents. So the fire department responds to a resident has insurance. That's all the resident is responsible for paying. If the cost is $1,000, the insurance company only pays $200. The other $800 is eliminated. Is that accurate? Okay, so residents don't pay anything above and beyond what their insurance would pay. Okay, that generates about $70,000, $68,000. Next section down is our debt service on this building and the fire station. This money comes from our income taxes. So the way the agreement we have, the 20-year loan that we have, slightly more than 20 years, is our insurance, our RETA sends our income taxes on a monthly basis to Huntington Bank. Huntington Bank then divvies that money up into different pots of pools, principal payment, interest payment, excess. Once these dollar amounts are met, meaning $135,000 for principal, $172,000 for interest, whatever's left over, which is that $898,000 that I mentioned in the general fund, we can spend on whatever we want. These funds automatically are sequestered and we don't control them. They're controlled by Huntington Bank to guarantee the payment on our debt service. So if we wanted to, we couldn't touch this money. And then there's a $180,000 transfer from the general fund to pay for a general obligation bond, which was the excess cost beyond what our construction bond on this building was. The general idea behind, so as you can see, we pay roughly, normally it's about 400 grand a year in debt service. The general idea is to, after 10 years, we can refinance that note. What we're hoping to do, if we do that, if it's about $6 million total dollars, in 10 years, we will have paid off about a third of the principal, about $2 million. The idea would be, it's going to be a stretch now, but we were on track to do it when we had $2 million in the bank 2 years ago. The idea would be to take $2 million after 10 years, put that against the principal and refinance the final $2 million. So we would be going from a $400,000 annual payment to about an $85,000 annual payment, freeing up $315,000 a year for us to do whatever we needed to do with. Could be difficult to pull off now, but we're trying to develop strategies to maybe make it happen still. Okay, and then the last page, you'll see a $16,000 refuse collection charges fee. That's the amount that is on the residents' water bill. It's a $1 charge. That's what we used to charge the residents, $12 to pick up trash. We've got that reduced down to $1 and then the processing fee on a monthly basis. And that's what that $16,000 is. Questions about revenue? Okay. The other spreadsheet that's 21 pages long, I'm not going to go through every detail of it, but the top section is the police department, the 100-1101 fund. That's the police department. It's the general fund. It's the portion of the police department salaries that are paid out of the general fund. There's notes in the column on the right in red to give you a sense of staffing. The top line is what we pay the chief of police. The next line is what we pay a portion of the ranked officers. Actually, in this case, it'll be all the ranked officers. It's the lieutenant and 2 full-time sergeants. We do not have 2 full-time sergeants right now. We have 1. It is the intent or the desire to add 1. We don't know who that individual would be. There's a process we have to go through, and the chief would have to go through of adding a full-time sergeant. So that's in the budget. The next one down is our 10 full-time officers. This does not count the lieutenant or either sergeant. As you can see, there's a note that says 264,000 of that is paid in the 281 fund. So the actual rank and file officers, bless you, the rank and file officers cost almost $600,000 in payroll, just their pay, to have 10 full-time officers. This arrangement would give us 3 officers on duty, a commander and 2 patrolmen, sometimes 3 patrolmen. Any questions about that? Okay. Next section down is the administrative assistant. This is Bonnie. This would be Bonnie's salary. Excuse me, camera officers. This is to run the camera as often as we can on the interstate. That's the 81,000. The reason you're seeing a jump from 55,000 from last year is because we went a period of time where we weren't paying a full-time officer and we were ramping up hiring new part-timers to get to full staffing in that department. This actually gives us for a lesser cost. Now the salary amount is more, but the overall benefits and wages cost is roughly the same or slightly less. Because we're not paying benefits because these are all part-time officers, but what we're getting is actually more coverage on the interstate. Doing it and using the mechanism of having it staffed with part-time officers. Next section down is, the next one down is the administrative assistant, the police department. On the police department side, that's Bonnie. Next line down is the bailiffs. These are part-time officers and bailiffs. There's 4, and then Rob Vaverka. As you can see, the number fluctuates. Ideally, with the additional sergeant and patrolman, we would be looking at being able to reduce the number on the dollar amount on that and have the need. And then police department overtime, a substantial part of that overtime is actually refunded to us through grants. It does include some overtime, but a big part of that, chief, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is reimbursed to us. It's like the DOI checkpoints and things like that. We get that back in grant money. Any questions about salaries and wages for the police department? Okay. Next section down is the benefits portion of the police department. Roughly, our cost in Medicare is about $15,000. Our hospitalization bill is about $160,000. That's the amount that we pay, the 85% that we pay for plus the basic, right? The reimbursement of their God, what's the term I'm looking for? Co-pays and things like that, that they would have to pay, prescriptions, those kind of things. So about 160,000. PRS, 22,400. That's a percentage of overall cost of the part-time employees and the administrative assistant. That's 14% of the total wages of the camera officers, the uniform, or the administrative assistant, and the part-time officers. 170,000 is the police pension. That's a function. It's our share is 19.5%. We have to pay 19.5% of the police officers' pensions. That's the full-time police officers. And then life insurance is however many employees sign up for the life insurance plan. We do not pay for that. They pay for that themselves. We pay for it up front, and then we deduct it from their payroll. Uniforms, we are responsible for providing per contract a certain number of dress shirts, dress pants, things like that. That's what that number is. It's not, we're not buying people's t-shirts or things like that. They get an allowance in their check. It's $500 a year to buy their stuff they need in that, to manage that. We buy holsters and dress shirts and that kind of attire. Chief, is there anything, did I miss anything on that? Okay, all right. Next section down, contractual services, $240,000. This is things like our cost for dispatch, our Sundance, which is the system they use to communicate, the various contracts necessary to run the police department. Below that is leads, it's $9,000. They have to operate that. They need that so they can know who they're talking to when they pull somebody over or make an arrest. Membership dues, you're going to see a jump from $960 to $5,960. This is the Southwest Enforcement Bureau. Is it Southwest or Southeast? Southwest. Basically, it's our own SWAT team. We do this for the fire department. So this is the police equivalent of the fire department team. We haven't been participating in this. The incident that happened on 44th was not the trigger. It is something that we had been talking. It just happened to time out the same way. Camera enforcement fees, $2,250,000. This is what we have to pay court and the camera company. Because you have to have an upfront filing fee on these tickets. So we owe, for every citation that gets paid, I think it's $27.50 we have to pay the camera company. And for every ticket that gets filed in the court, we have to pay $20. That's what this covers. Cell phones, animal control, about $10,000. Next page, second page. Training seminars, range usage, prisoner housing and related expense, roughly 17,500. Microphone.
We go back to the SEB, the SEB is 15,000.
We still haven't officially gotten the certificate estimated resources. So I'm gonna leave it in the budget as 15 for now, or 5 for now, and then we'll amend it.
Right. I don't expect our enrollment for minimum of 90 days,
Okay,
minimally.
Is that gonna be the same amount every year?
it has been for several years.
Yes.
Well.
We weren't in that unit last year. The last couple years, we haven't been in SEB. Thanks.
Mrs. Gers, we can't hear you. Your discussion, we couldn't hear you.
The question was, is that 15,000 gonna be an every year expense?
Okay, thank you.
Prisoner housing is about 17,000, anywhere between 17 and 20,000 a year. We've kind of estimated that at this point. Next section down are expenses, supplies and materials, fuel, cost of gasoline, roughly $35,000 a year, tires, repairs in each vehicle if necessary, outfitting costs of the 2 new cruisers. And then you'll see below that an $83,000 expense for the two new SUVs that we have. Any questions about that? All right, total police department budget is $3.95 million. Keep in mind, 2.25 of that is expense to run the cameras. Next page. The very top line, you'll see $1 million transfer. That's the transfer to the police department. Fire department, excuse me. We're having some technical difficulties with the camera, so I'm trying to get a sense of what's going on, but next section down, roughly the street lights in the village, $52,000. Traffic signals, these are the repairs. You're gonna see $57,000. That's a big jump from what they normally are. That's because 51,000 of that is the cost to repair the Harvard sign, the Harvard Avenue sign. It can reset the cameras. Cause I think I don't know what happened, why they're not functioning.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the street lights, I had asked the service department why there were no Christmas lights from Bridgeview on the boulevard from Bridgeview north to Fleet. And he said there are no street lights there. Is that accurate?
That is correct. There's no streetlights in the medians.
Correct.
That's right.
Is there a reason?
They were never put in.
Okay,
I mean, it's been like that for,
ever?
yeah. Yep. Okay, next section down is a contractual obligation we have with the county. It's the county health payment. Below that is the recreation director. And then, that would be his salary plus the Medicare and PRS that we'd have to pay to him. It's relatively small, 11,000. This year it'd be $11,400 for the rec director. Next year it would be 12,000. It's a part-time position. All right, below that is a bunch of contractual items. So roughly $2,750 in contractual services. Dog park, the expense of the dog park light, the electricity for that light is about $750. And then you're gonna see a section that says 8,000 for catering and parties. So that includes the notes on the right, Easter, Memorial Day, Earth Day, senior dinner. This is where these expenses that council requested, this is where these expenses are. I put the entire request of council, their budget in the overall budget, but it's in different spots. So I'm gonna have to walk you through each one. So Easter, Memorial Day, Earth Day, senior dinner, Halloween, children's Christmas party, 2 movie nights and a tailgate party, $8,000 are all, that's this line. Based on the numbers that you provided me. The next line down is senior transportation, $10,000 for bus trips. That's where that dollar amount landed, was there. The next page, top of the page, supplies and materials, $39,500. This includes the garage sale, teen program, 2 movie nights, the gift cards for Thanksgiving dinner or whatever we want to, Christmas dinner, whatever you want to apply it for. Event items and mailers.
Mayor, it looks like you have movie nights in there twice, or is that just a carryover from the
It's
previous?
probably a carryover.
Okay,
The dollar amount's not in there twice.
thank you.
Next line down is uniforms cost, the cost of the sports uniforms for the youth athletics. In the athletic area, there was a request for pickleball equipment by council. That's in that number. Below that is capital outlay. This is a request for money that council asked for. A chunk of it, $30,000 of it, is from last year for work at Kathy Edwards Park to put water in. We're still working on it, to put water in there as well as some other amenities. And then council also asked for money for the 50s playground, at the end of 53rd and Brow. That's where that money is. Okay, good news we just learned today. It's not in this budget, but we will add it in a future budget or future appropriation. We did receive a $50,000 grant to repair the fence at Kathy Edwards Park. Okay. Next big number down is $200,000. That's for refuse collection. That's Kimball. That's the contract we have. To cover their expense. That's probably a little bit high, but I'd rather overestimate and have wiggle room than be short. Next section down is the service department. What we're looking at is a similar cycle as last year, where Mr. Milano would work as a contractor for the village for a portion of the year. And we would start the process of finding a permanent replacement full-time service director earlier in the year. That's what the $27,000 that you see, $28,000 you see as a salary. A full-time service director is probably gonna cost us somewhere in the eighties. Next line down, 4 full-time laborers. That's what we have right now. 3 full-time laborers, excuse me. This would be adding a 4th. We don't anticipate that need until the spring for the 4th, so it's gonna be a little less than this amount, but it'll be less. And then the next line down, 63,500, that would be the full-time mechanic. 5,000 would be overtime for, when they go out and plow the roads, that's overtime. They're out at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're getting overtime. So the service department salaries and wages, roughly $225,000. Below that, same thing, benefits, Medicare, hospitalization, PRS, life insurance. Any questions about the service department?
Yeah, Mayor, have we eliminated the foreman position or just at this time okay.
Jim, can you see if she needs help? Oh, Hillary's got it. Thank you. All right, next page. Service department contract, you're gonna see $98,000. That's a big jump. It's about a $50,000 jump from last year. That includes Joe Milano's contractual expense, but it also includes about $50,000 in tree work that hasn't been done in the village now in about 4 years. So it's been a while since we've had the arborist come out here and really clean some of these properties up. Chief? He's in there. Okay. Supplies and materials for the service department. $7,500. It's a substantial drop from last year, but that includes, council had requested, we buy new flags. That includes that cost in there. Fuel, office supplies, parts for the vehicles, and then you can see there's a rough $250 number for all the other trucks for a repair or an expense that may be specific to that truck. Obviously, if we don't have to spend money on one of those trucks, we don't. You can see last year there were a couple trucks we didn't spend any money on. All right, capital outlay in the service department, $499,000. This is the village's share of the 20s, East 26th Street, 52nd Street, and Harvard traffic pattern capital expenses. Now, what we have learned is that we did not receive the East 52nd Street grant. So this number will be in a future budget when we amend this budget, probably sometime in June. This number will be reduced by $150,000 because that was our share of the East 52nd Street project. So we're going to save a little money in that end, from that end. Next page you can see is blank. I'm not going to go through a blank page. So the next page after that is the mayor's budget. Now, that's a loose term for the administrative wing in the building. Mayor's salary, prosecutor's salary. This is Mr. Cicero. Norm Ince and Joe Grandinetti, they are our camera prosecutors. They work, you're never gonna see them. They work in Garfield Heights when people appeal their ticket. Those are the 2 guys that go manage those court hearings. Next line down is the clerk of court, which is Sarah. Next line down is the magistrate, Mr. Niemer, the one that here's mayor's court. He has not had a raise since he started in 2018, 2019. So this does call for giving him a modest raise from $8,400 a year on a part-time basis to $12,000 a year. He hasn't had a raise again since 2018, 2019. And then solicitor, that's Mr. Rufa. Same thing, the next section is Medicare, hospitalization, PRS, life insurance. Those are all a function of how many people are enrolled in the program and percentages. Contractual services, 77,000. This is copier, EAP services, our lobbyist, IT services, things like that. Solicitor legal services, in addition to our, in addition to what we pay the prosecutor and the solicitor as an employee, they also bill us on a contractual basis. It actually saves us money in that regard because we're not paying pension on those dollars. Next section down is engineering services. This is basically the cost of Jim and his firm to provide reports, to work on grant money, to do engineering review, things like that are necessary for the projects that we're operating and building, the $3 million that we have. The line below, before that is membership dues. This includes Mayors and Managers Association, things like that. Cell phone communication, that's self-explanatory. I have a village cell phone. Printing, this is newsletters. This will cover the cost of about 3 newsletters through the course of the year. Last year we did 1. This does not include postage for newsletters. This is if we have them printed and then hand deliver them. Seminars and training, we put $5,000 in the budget. Last year, I attended the statewide Mayors and Managers Association, the Ohio Municipal League, as well as a auditor state conference. We learn at these conferences, we learn some of the effective things that other communities are doing. We learn what are the requirements for state audit. It helps guide Kathleen and I to know what we need to be doing as it relates to budgeting and procedures to keep us in compliance with the state. And then the final line is court contractual services. If you recall, in 22 and 23, we weren't paying our share for some reason. We weren't paying our share to the court. At the end of the year, the court overall came up short. And they said, hey, Newburgh Heights, you represent 80% of the bill of all the cases that come into our court. So 80% of the shortfall you get to pay for. That number ended up being about $440,000. We tackled 320 of it, 340 of it last year, something like that.
Yeah.
So we got through the vast majority of it. This year we'll finish paying that off and we'll be done having to pay that. All right, next page. Additional costs, supplies and materials. This includes the employee holiday party. It includes, we might need a new chair. We might need a new copier. That kind of catch-all kind of stuff. Mayor has a $5,000 expense account. This includes things like staff meetings. If I'm meeting with a developer, last year you can see, even though it's $5,000 last year, only $1,600 was spent in that column. It's there. I don't always use it. Office supplies, $5,000. Last year we spent $5,200. Some years we spend $1,000. Some years we spend $3,800. It's kind of a plug number, 5,000. It's there if we need it. If we don't spend it. Next section down is council's budget. This is the cost of 5 council members for the course of the year, as well as your pension and benefits. Contractual services, $11,000. This is the cost of codifying your ordinances and 2 shred days as requested. Membership dues. This is the cost of your guys' council. What the hell's the
Noaka, North.
yeah, I think that NOAC, yeah. Yep, that's right. So I don't know if anybody's attending them, but they're available to you guys. The meetings, they have them once a month. They're there. And then seminars and training, this would be if somebody says, hey, I've got to go to a NOACA meeting and they're charging $20 for members this month because they're serving lunch. That's where that $20 would come from, or out of that fund. Supplies and materials, $1,800. This includes the dollars you asked for council clothing and employee recognition events and awards. The next one is office supplies. There's a $700 line in here for a tech tool that you asked for. So that's, so you know that's where it is. Next page. This is the finance department. This would be the finance officer's salary and the payroll clerk's salary. And then, of course, their wages and benefits. Next section down is contractual services, things like fees, copiers, subscriptions, that kind of thing. Membership dues. Finance directors also have a membership. RETA, retainer, and expense. We have to pay a percentage of how much is collected every month to RETA. I think it's 2.5%. That's roughly $36,000. There's a cell phones for the department, RETA software and maintenance. We run a program called eGov. That program costs us about $26,000 a year. That's the cost of doing business. The subpoena program for those folks that don't pay their taxes. Eventually, the Regional Income Tax Agency will send them subpoenas and say, you have to come to court if you don't pay your taxes. Printing, publications, things like that. Bank and credit fees. This could be interest charges or like the Huntington bank account, how I mentioned before, they give us our income taxes. They're going to take their share of handling our money for us. Even though we don't have a choice, they're going to still take some of it because that's what banks do. Seminars and training, same thing. There are training and seminars for fiscal officers to attend. Supplies and materials, $500 in that account. Next page. Very top line, office supplies. The number is pretty consistent, around $3,500 a year. This includes things like checks and paper and like you would think, office supplies. All right, next section down. Any questions about the finance department? Next section down is the building department and general village-owned property expenses. This includes the building commissioner, the housing inspector, and the full-time building department admin, as well as their pension, Medicare, hospitalization costs. Any question about those? Okay. Next section down are the contractual expenses that include the liability insurance. It's 300 grand. The liability insurance, believe it or not, we have to pay property taxes on certain properties. Those are actually paid by the CIC. They're not exempt. So we have to, some of those are owned by the CIC. The CBO, we have a contract for a certified billing official. That's where they come out of. Inspection costs. There are certain mechanical inspections that Hillary and the building department are not certified to do. Things like furnaces, hot water tanks. You have to have a certified installation for your hot water tank, folks. You can't put it in yourself. It's a common thing. Most people think they can. Furnaces, electrical, certain structural things. You have to have a certified inspector. So we have to outsource that. The cleaning service, county tax sharing. What a lot of people don't know is the old RTA garage, which is now the county public works garage. The incentive that they essentially forced us to live by to get them to renovate and relocate all the county garages to that site is that we would, for a period of 10 years, split the property taxes or the income taxes rather, on that site with the county. We are actually working to get that lifted, but right now we have to share half the cost of the income taxes on that property. Next section down is $60,000. This is the property taxes for what the CIC owns, as well as general operations. That usually means attorney's fees and accounting fees, because we have to have reports, and this entity also gets audited. Next line down are the cost of the electric for service garage, for this building. First Suburbs is entity that the building department utilizes pretty frequently. That's their equivalent to the council, NOACA, or the Mayors and Managers Association. Gas service, just, to keep the place warm and hot. Telephone system, our village-wide telephone system costs us about $30,000 a year. It's not the same kind of telephone system you have at home. Very different. So that's why it's so expensive. Water and sewer service, about $2,500. Seminars and training, about $5,000. These are just budgeted numbers if they don't use them. Next page, this is the end of the general fund, and then I'm gonna be able to accelerate this pretty quickly. Supplies and materials, roughly $15,000, which would be a reduction of about $6,000 from last year. Office supplies, about $3,500. The home maintenance grant. This is the smaller home maintenance grant. This is the one that you can, if you spend $1,000, the village will give you $1,000. We spent about almost 19,000 in that last year. I put about 20 grand into it. And then the last line you'll see is a transfer to the general obligation bond. That is the one portion of the cost of these buildings the village is required to pay. The reason it's 180,000 and not 90 this year is because we didn't make the transfer last year. We just moved it into the fiscal year 2025. So the overall, below that are some expenses, like county auditor fees. They charge us to collect our own property taxes. State treasurer's fees. They charge us to collect income taxes. Division of Water, they charge us to collect the money for trash. State examiners, this is the state auditors. This is our biannual audit year, so 24 and 23 are going to get audited this year. The state charges us to audit us. And then 24,000 is our workers' comp expense. So general fund, we expect to have about $8.6 million in revenue. We expect to have about $8.5 million in expenses, leave us plus $100,000. I think that's going to come in closer to 250 to 300. But again, I try to overestimate in expenses and underestimate in revenue. And then we'll adjust that a couple times during the course of the year as necessary to make sure we're meeting our obligations to operate the village. All right, I'm gonna move forward a couple pages to the 205 fund. You'll see it's roughly $3.3 million. This is the 20s, the east that's ongoing, the project that's ongoing. East 26th Street. This includes the cost of East 52nd Street. It's not going to be in this. We're actually eventually going to extract that because we did not get the grant money to pay for it. And then there's something called the multi-street project, which is Beta and Gamma, correct?
That one is an older project that was already completed. That was 43rd and Alpha. But we have to return a small amount to the water department.
Okay, thank you for clarification. So this is the grant fund. This is the expense side of that grant fund. Okay. Next page. The 231 fund. It says, even though on the spreadsheet it says coronavirus local recovery fund, that is the ARPA fund. That's where the expanded home maintenance grant is being paid for. So last year we paid out $55,000 of that. This year there's $145,000 in that kitty. Do not think that that means there's $145,000 in available grants out there. There's only $100,000 in available grants out there. Because 45 of it was applied for last year. We just haven't paid it out yet. So there are, if I'm correct, 20 grants available this year, Hillary? Yep. All right. And then what we're gonna have to start deciding by mid-year, before next year, by early fall, do we want to fund that program ourselves moving forward? $281 fund, this is the property tax fund for the police department. You'll see that's $264,000 of the police department is paid for out of this fund. Flipping forward to the 292 fund. This is the expense of the fire department. So you'll see the chief's salary. You'll see the expense of the full-time firefighter's salary. The cost of the assistant chief and lieutenant. This is their salaries. Next section down is basically their wages, their expenses, hospitalization, Medicare, pension, life insurance. That's that expense. Below that, you'll find contractual services, pretty consistent number. Membership dues, 15,000. Electric service, the cost of the electric for the fire departments, gas, electric, cell phones and communications, water, their cost of water on their building, and their training and seminars. Supplies and materials, $20,000, pretty consistent with last year's number. Protective clothing, 18,000. Fire department's gasoline expense, fuel expense is about 7,000. Office supplies, chief keeps that pretty low. Equipment repairs, about 10 grand. And then you'll see each vehicle they have with a specific dollar amount. And those are based on the various needs or potential needs for those vehicles. Next line, next page, top of the page, $28,000. That's Chief and I met about this. This is to put a refurbished patient load system on one of the ambulances. The idea is we do it one this year. The budget looks good. We maybe do another in the second half or push it off to the following year. The second ambulance. All right. That's a portion of the fire department. Fire department total operating budget is about $1.31 million. And then the next section down, we use the money that's collected from the insurance companies. We use that money to offset some of the cost of our dispatching with the CVD. Okay. And then the 301 fund, you'll see 270 on the bottom, and then the top page, you'll see that's our expense on the bond, the money we borrowed to build these two buildings. Below that, in the 415 fund, that's a few years back. We put a chunk of money away because we knew that ultimately there was going to be things that we needed to do this building, maintenance, upgrades, repairs. If you can't see it now, but if you take a look, some of the soffit on the overhang of the building is coming loose. There's gonna have to be some repair work done there. The intent is to soundproof this conference room so we can use it as we initially planned, and that is where we hold executive session. There's some furniture that needs to be repaired and replaced. And we're outgrowing the administrative side of the building. So what we'd like to do is what we currently use as the executive session room. Take that, split it in half. It'll still be a small conference room for the attorneys, for mayor's court and things like that. And then the other side would be turned into an office, an additional office space where we could put 2 desks for Jim. And additional staff for the building department as well as the CBO. Because as payroll occupies the other desk in the finance office, Jim's not gonna be able to work out of that office. So that money that we put away, that's what it's here for, so it doesn't impact the general fund. It also includes a new CO monitoring system for the fire department. As well as trench drains that we've been talking about repairing for ages and haven't never got done, that were, when we first constructed the building, unfortunately didn't end up working the way that we needed them to work. All right, very last page, total expenditures, $14 million, 14.3 million. That's the appropriations ordinance and budget. Are there questions? Going once. Twice. Sold. Council has before them ordinance 2025-01 presented for suspension of rules for adoption. Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the Village of Newburgh Heights through December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-01 be adopted, rules suspended, and that ordinance 2025-01 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second. Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Rayora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Rayora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-01 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-02 presented for suspension of rules. Jim, do you want to do a quick explanation?
As part of our NPDES permit, for the EPA, this is, it's a requirement that we have public education, public involvement, things like that. The Cuyahoga County Sewer District, or not Sewer District, Soil and Water Conservation District, does that for us and tracks, when people come to the events and things like that. So this actually comes through every year. We pass it every year because it's much easier for them to do it than us to try to do this type of thing ourselves.
Any questions for Jim? Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District for performance of public involvement and public education for pipe services and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-02 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-02 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second. Please call the roll on suspension of rules.
Mrs. Rayora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Rayora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-02 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-03 presented for suspension of rules. Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the OHM advisors to complete all requirements necessary to comply with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District updated Title III and Title IV code regulations and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Jim, will you provide a brief explanation?
Yeah, this is a new requirement by the sewer district. Not that I expect you all to look at it closely, but the thick report that is now due used to be a 2-page report. And what they wanted very generic information. Now they're getting very specific. Right on the front of the report, it says if we do not fill out this report, that we can no longer be part of the MCIP or Member Community Infrastructure Program, which means we can't go after all those grant dollars that we've been getting. So it is very important that we get this thing completed. It's due like mid-March. So it is important that we get started on it. Thank you.
And if I'm correct, based on our conversations, it'll be a reduced expense moving forward. Just this initial one is a little more pricey.
Yeah, this first one, because there's a lot of research that has to go into it, it's expensive. And then in the future, it's just a very minor update. So it won't be nearly as bad. This is good for the next 5 years. We are allowed to update it as needed. And the updates really will be what projects we want to complete that year, or if we start having a sewer issue on one of the streets, then we would like include that item in the report so that we could go after grant funding for it. So it's really about getting grant funding.
Any questions?
So the fee is $10,000?
The total fee is 10,000, yes.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-03 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-03 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll on suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra?
Yes.
Mrs. Cray?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Dunman?
Yes.
Ms. Gersh?
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra?
Yes.
Mrs. Cray?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Dunman?
Yes.
Ms. Gersh?
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-03 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-04 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance approving the recodification, editing, and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Newburgh Heights, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Are there any questions?
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-04 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-04 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra?
Yes.
Mrs. Cray?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Dunman?
Yes.
Ms. Gersh?
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra?
Yes.
Mrs. Cray?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Dunman?
Yes.
Ms. Gersh?
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-04 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-05 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Clerk, or excuse me, council, do you have any questions?
I do.
Fire away.
First question is, it says all of council. I'm not actually for this. While I feel that Mr. Edelberg is a lovely man, I'm willing to negotiate on this pay provision because I think that $1,000 a month is way too high for the small amount of work that he's actually required to do. Yeah, if we want to refer this to committee, that'd be great.
So there's a couple options we can do. You can refer to a committee. We can go back into executive session, set it aside, go back into executive session at the end of the meeting. You can have a discussion about it here, now,
Can we also move to a pass?
or you can move to pass. I think Ms. Gersh is asking her name be removed as one of the introduced by, if that,
Can we just make an amendment for that?
you don't even need to make an amendment, we can just change it,
Okay,
right? We could just correct it.
Yeah, fine.
that's fine.
Okay.
So those are your options.
Say pass it.
Mayor, I make a motion that ordinance 2025-05 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-05 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Motion moved and seconded. Clerk, you please call the roll on suspension of rules.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
No.
Ms. Gersh.
No.
Ordinance 2025-05 is placed on first reading. Council has before them ordinance 2025-06 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Are there any questions? Okay, clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with attorney Michael Cicero to perform services as assistant solicitor and assistant prosecutor for the village of Newburgh Heights, Ohio, for the period of January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2026, repealing all prior ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-06 be adopted, rules suspended, and 2025-06 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-06 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-07 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Are there any questions? Clerk, please read the ordinance.
An ordinance reappointing Charles A. Nemur magistrate and establishing the rate of pay for the village magistrate and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-07 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-07 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate adoption.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-07 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-08 presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Are there any questions? Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending the rate of compensation of the at-will position of clerk of court and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-08 be adopted, rules suspended, and that ordinance 2025-08 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Greora,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-08 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-09 presented for suspension of rules. Are there any questions? Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending ordinance 2024-28 relating to the pay, remuneration, and benefits of police personnel and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-09 be adopted, rules suspended, and that ordinance 2025-09 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Ordinance 2025-09 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-10, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Any questions? Clerk, will you please read the ordinance?
An ordinance establishing the pay, remuneration, and benefits of the Newburgh Heights Fire Department and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-10 be adopted, rules suspended, and ordinance 2025-10 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Ordinance 2025-10 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-11, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Any questions? Clerk, please read the ordinance.
An ordinance consolidating the pay, remuneration, and benefits provisions for all finance department personnel and amending or repealing as applicable all ordinances, resolutions, or provisions therein that are inconsistent with the pay, remuneration, and benefit schedules adopted hereby and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-11 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-11 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Thank you.
Ordinance 2025-11 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-12, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Any questions? Please read the ordinance.
These were written when you were trying to like test my. She sells, she's. It is. An ordinance consolidating the pay, remuneration, and benefits provisions for all building department personnel and amending or repealing as the applicable all ordinances or provisions therein that are inconsistent with the pay, remuneration, and benefit schedules adopted hereby and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-12 be adopted, rules suspended, and that ordinance 2025-12 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray.
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Ordinance 2025-12 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-13, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Are there any questions? Please read the ordinance.
An ordinance consolidating the pay, remuneration, and benefits provisions for all service department personnel and amending or repealing as applicable all ordinances or provisions therein that are inconsistent with the pay, remuneration, and benefit schedules adopted hereby and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-13 be adopted, rules suspended, and that ordinance 2025-13 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
yes,
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Dunman.
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
yes,
Ordinance 2025-13 is adopted. Council has before them ordinance 2025-14, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Any questions? Okay, clerk, will you please read the resolution? or the ordinance rather?
An ordinance amending section 3E of ordinance 2018-15 with respect to the establishment of a community reinvestment area in the village of Newburgh Heights, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that ordinance 2025-14 be adopted, rules suspended, and that 2025-14 be placed on its first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Council, I'm sorry, please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Ordinance 2025-14 is adopted. Council has before them payroll resolutions 4643, 4644, 4645, 4646, and 4647, presented for suspension of rules and adoption. Clerk, will you please read the resolutions?
A resolution authorizing and directing the payment of certain bills. Be it resolved by the council of the village of Newburgh Heights of Ohio that the following bills be paid and the same are hereby approved. And the fiscal officer and mayor are hereby respectfully authorized to draw their warrants and checks for payment of said bills that's set forth on the following pages in the total amount of $826,586.79 and declaring an emergency. Payroll resolution 4644, a resolution authorizing and directing the payment of certain bills. Be it resolved by the council of the village of Newburgh Heights of Ohio that the following bills be paid and the same are hereby approved. And the fiscal officer and mayor are hereby respectfully authorized to draw their warrants and checks for payment of said bills set forth on the following pages in the total amount of $95,423.96 and declaring an emergency. Excuse me, an emergency. Payroll resolution 4645, a resolution authorizing and directing the payment of certain bills. Be it resolved by the council of the village of Newburgh Heights of Ohio, the following bills be paid and the same are hereby approved. And the fiscal officer and mayor are hereby respectfully authorized to draw their warrants and checks for payment of said bills that's set forth on the following pages in the total amount of $105,803.16 and declaring an emergency. A reminder to council that pay is especially high because it was the fire department and service department clothing allowance pay. Payroll resolution 4646, a resolution authorizing and directing the payment of certain bills. Be it resolved by the council of the village of Newburgh Heights of Ohio that the following bills be paid and the same are hereby approved. And the fiscal officer and mayor are hereby respectfully authorized to draw their warrants and checks for payment of said bills that's set forth on the following pages. The total amount of $1,428,320.98 and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that
One
payroll.
more, excuse me.
Oh,
Payroll resolution 4647. Now we just won't have to do it next meeting. A resolution authorizing and directing the payment of certain bills. Be it resolved by the council of the village of Newburgh Heights of Ohio that the following bills be paid and the same are hereby approved. And the fiscal officer and mayor are hereby respectfully authorized to draw their warrants and checks for payment of said bills as set forth on the following pages in the total amount of $96,501.36 and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that resolutions 4643, 4644, 4645, 4646, and 4647 be adopted, rules suspended, and that payroll resolutions 4643, 4644, 4645, 4647,
4646.
4646, and 4647 be placed on their first, second, and final reading for immediate passage.
Second.
Thank you.
Please call the roll for suspension of rules.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Please call the roll to adopt.
Mrs. Grayorra,
Yes.
Mrs. Cray,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Dunman,
Yes.
Ms. Gersh.
Yes.
Payroll resolutions 4643, 4644, 4645, 4646, and 4647 have been adopted. For the general public and those of you sitting in the audience that just endured that with us, thank you. Really what those were procedural requirements to align our payroll orders with the appropriations ordinance we just adopted. So to match everything and line them up. That's why there were so many there. But thank you. Moving on to reports, council pro tempore Greora.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to get a shout out to all of our teens in the area. We're going to try to get a teen program together in March. If you would like to participate, please call and leave your name, your age, your address, and phone number on 216-641-2123. That is the council line. Again, if you're interested in a teen program, I need your name, age, date, phone number, and address at 216-641-2123, and that is all I have.
And none of the teens are gonna see or hear this because they're all on TikTok.
Again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
TikTok's back.
No one's
TikTok's
responding
back.
unless you allow them to text you, so no phone calls.
They
All right.
know how to use phones.
Thank you. Councilwoman Cray.
I don't have anything at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moran, Councilman Moran.
Time.
Easter time. Okay.
Councilman Dunman.
Good evening, thank you. So all through 2024, for those folks that were listening, I said that we were cautiously optimistic about our finances for 2024 and moving into 2025. Thanks to our fiscal officer, our mayor, and the council department heads. We are minutely close to all of our projections in revenue and expense, including at least $500,000 in unexpected expenses. So outstanding. Thank you, everybody. This is what I mean when I say cautiously optimistic. We are moving forward very optimistically at this point. Thank you.
Councilman Gersh.
Just two things. I want to thank the service department for doing a bang up job plowing the snow this last week. I got up in the morning and my street was completely clean, which was kind of surprising because it was really early. And the second thing is I want to let council know I have a meeting with First Tee on the 29th of this month regarding the movie nights. You guys have any input or movies you want to see or specific dates, please let me know before then. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. The December budget snapshot, I am gonna go through it real quick because Mr. Dunman did touch on a point that I'd like to make. Thank you. So at the beginning of 2024, 23 was a challenging year for the village. At the beginning of 24, we put a budget together estimating roughly about $7.36 million in revenue and $7.16 million in expenses for what we hoped was ideally a surplus of about $200,000. As Mr. Dunman noted, we got hit with the $440,000 bill from the court. That the interim occupant of this seat knew about that we did not. So we had to scramble to adjust the budget and satisfy the court. We inherited about a $300,000 construction and engineering bill, as well as council at one point during the year went through the process of firing our previous camera company and hiring a new one. And despite some of the laughable statements being made on social media at this time, we did not hire my camera company. Because if we did, I wouldn't be sitting here. In any event, that process cost the village several $100,000. It was expensive to go through it, but it was going to be far more expensive for us to stay with the firm that we were with. They just were not meeting our needs. So we moved on. All told, that we had to adjust about $700,000. and come up with about $700,000 that we were not expecting we had to do. We managed to do it, and we finished the year, actually within about 98% of our projection for overall revenue on the year. We would have hit it had we not switched camera companies. That created a small lull that resulted in a month where our revenue was below anticipation, and our expenses, we were actually at 101% of our overall expenses. And that was, again, a combination of the result of those unforeseen invoices that came in. In the end, we ended up spending about $28,000 more than we brought in. So we were able to weather that hit. If we hadn't had those, we would have likely finished with a surplus of between $600,000 and $750,000. But we're through those. So I feel really good, as Bill mentioned, Mr. Councilman Dunman mentioned, excitedly optimistic about this year. There's a lot going to be happening, but really happy about the way the team operated. And in that entire process, don't forget, and this is for the residents, council was here with us. We were adding personnel the whole time. We were ramping up staff. We were actually increasing expenditures so that we could provide the basic services and the fundamental core functions of the village throughout the year. I will be giving it I have to give an annual report according to the state. So I'll be giving that on February 4th. But I'm pretty happy with where we are. That's my report for this evening. Kathleen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I guess we'll continue that discussion with the December 2024 fund cash report. Council has a pile of my reports since we haven't had a regular meeting in 6 weeks. General fund receipts in December 2024 were $342,227.62. General fund disbursements in December 2024 were $674,878.18. And the unexpended balance in the general fund in December 2024 was $71,706.48. All funds receipts for December 2024 were $1,578,745.48. All funds disbursements in December 2024 were $1,428,320.98. And the unexpended balance in all funds in December 2024 was $751,889.82. Questions from council? Okay, let's move on to the Rita tax reports. We'll go through December 2024. We received $80,041.06, which was an increase of $9,610.55, or 13.65% over December 2023. And year over year, we were almost exactly where we wanted to be, which says very good news for the total year. In the January 2025 report, we're off to a good start. We received $124,140.31, which was an increase of $42,615.95, or 52.27% over January of 2024. We're not expecting that big of an increase. Questions from council on the Rita reports? That's all I have, unless you have other questions. There's no maybe. All right, thank you.
Chief Majoy.
Just two things, Mayor. This week we called our first parking ban, and their compliance was mediocre at best. Our officers yesterday issued a boatload of parking citations. I would just respectfully ask that everybody in the room share with their fellow residents that the reason why we call a parking ban is because the snowplow operators have got to be able to get around vehicles to plow the streets. And we need the streets plowed to get police, fire, and ambulance personnel through there for public safety. It's not because we want to neat, streets. Well, of course, we want that, but at the end of the day, it's about safety. Now that we've got one underneath of our belt, the warning period is over. The next time around, there will not be as nice of a warning. It will be ticketing and it will be towing, and we don't want to resort to that. So we put it on social media. We send out to the news media outlets. We knock on doors. We just need compliance from people. And if the service department folks were here, I'm sure they'd be praising this because it's really hard to drive these big snowplow trucks around vehicles, especially on some of the more narrow streets like, Pierce in the 50s. It's really hard. So if everybody could please do their diligence. The second thing I want to comment on is, and everybody in the room is probably aware, on Friday, January 10th, we had what's called a swatting incident, ended up being a SWAT standoff. And this was on 44th Street. The location, the time, the weather could not have been any worse for any of this. At the end of the day, it turned out to be some juveniles that were pulling prank phone calls and making up stories about a shooting and a person that was injured and everything else. The end result is we had to call several different surrounding agencies. We had to call the sheriff's department for a SWAT team, which brought negotiators, the whole gamut. And it was a colossal waste because of the actions of these children. And I have fielded several questions about going after the parents, and there's nothing more that I would like to do than go after the parents. However, we must stay within the confines of the law. There are several of the juveniles who are being charged for this. The parents were put on notice. We've actually made contact with thanks to the building department, the owners of the property, the folks that were responsible had only been living there for several weeks. We've already had several complaints over at that residence. We welcome all residents that want to come here or citizens. We just ask that they remain lawful when they get here. But at the end of the day, I'm not inclined to suggest creating a new law over something. I spoke to the chief of police from Euclid. They do have a pending ordinance over there, but there's a lot of challenges to it. And I just don't know that an isolated incident like this would warrant us wanting to pursue some sort of legislation that is above and beyond what the revised code currently has. And so they are being held accountable for it. Hopefully the juvenile court system will do their diligence to send a message because this could have been really bad. I feel really bad for everybody who lives within a couple 100 feet of that because they would have been woken up by all the sirens, all the lights, all the people, all the commotion. But it really broke my heart watching other occupants of that residence walking out holding small children in their arms. It was about 15 degrees and snowing profusely. And we had no choice but to bring these folks out. And it makes me sad that kids would result to conduct like this out of fun and pranks. And I took a step out of my normal routine. And that is that most of you probably have never heard me raise my voice, but when these kids were in the processing room and giggling and laughing, I kind of went off on them a little bit. I'm not saying I'm proud or disproud of it, but I made my point known because I have a really, really, really big problem with this. The inherent dangers that it could have caused, the injuries that it could have caused. But I am thankful at the end of the day that there were no injuries. I hope that it's an isolated incident. We had one like this several years ago. I will say that I was proud of our officers because they quickly established a perimeter. They did everything that they're trained to do, and that helped. And so a lot of times you don't see the officers in action when situations like this, but it's good to know that, and thanks to the elected officials here, that we have the equipment necessary when something happens like this. And yeah, we do not have a SWAT team, but most agencies our size don't. But we have the equipment, less lethal weapons. We have carbines, we have tasers, we have a pepper ball gun. We have the best of the best. And it's thanks to you guys here that approved those expenses because we need those, and this was an example. Unfortunately, we didn't have to use any of those, but if we did, I feel confident knowing that our personnel are fully trained and able to handle that. And I will take any questions if you have any.
I have a question about the parking. Years ago, and maybe even last year, I believe the police department went around and honked their horn or made bullhorn announcements. Was that done this year?
It was not done on the night that we called it. Those officers are receiving counseling for not doing so. Counseling generously worded. But I rest assured that that will not happen again. And every first snowfall for some years, we've had this, and I really hate getting those phone calls, depending on the hour of the day that the mayor makes for something our officers didn't do. I don't fault him for those phone calls, they're deserving. But rest assured, moving forward, that will happen. And
I just think we would have had more compliance. My neighbors were yelling at me. Why didn't you tell me? I'm like, I didn't know. Usually I hear it.
well, we send a press release, we send an email, we put it on social media.
Chief, I will add that on every street in Newburgh Heights, there's a big sign with red letters and it says, when snow falls above 2 inches, get your car off the street. So there's
I
a little bit
understand.
of both here.
Wait a minute, we've had residents that have lived here 30+ years, and the mayor will tell you, we've had them call him and myself. I've lived here for 30 years. Why am I getting a ticket? Why are you parked on the street? And you know, you've lived here for 30 years not to be on the street.
Right. Well,
So
the good news is that when our new website is up and running, there is a similar to the code or the code red. That you can sign up for, that it'll send you a text message. Say, hey, there's a parking ban, move your cars. You know, but again, when we've got 2 or 3 officers on shift, we've got crashes, we've got calls. We have to prioritize things, but we do our diligence. But again, the point I want to make is that the warning period is over. We're gonna put out a snow release, and sometimes we do it preemptively. If we know that there's a big snowfall coming on Friday, we're gonna put it out, 24, 48 hours ahead of time to let everybody know it's coming. And a lot of times we're the first ones to do it, which is fine. I'm not concerned about the safety anywhere else. I'm concerned about the safety here. And so, we just would like everyone just spread the word and please comply.
bottom line, if it looks like 2 inches, it probably is.
Yeah, when in doubt, get off the street.
On the note, the chief mentioned the website. I am meeting with Munibit and Christine on the 28th. I think we're about ready to go live with the website, so it's almost there. Anything further, chief?
How come the speed sign isn't working on the boulevard?
Well, if Mother Nature
Cold?
would bring some more vitamin D and some sunshine with it, it would charge those batteries right up.
Oh, okay.
But unfortunately, I get notifications of a low battery and it's been cloudy. And so today was a sunny day, so I'm hopeful, despite it being as cold as it is, the cold doesn't impact it, the sun does because it's solar. So I am hopefully optimistic that the sun today will have charged the batteries back up.
Chief Higgs?
Mayor, I only have 2 things. We had, since our last council meeting, we did have a firefighter leave us and go to Strongsville. And I just got notice that we have another firefighter that is going to Willoughby, the first of March. So we did put up an advertisement for applications. And so we'll be accepting applications. Just want to let council know that you are aware of why we're getting applications. And if anyone has any questions for me?
Any questions for Chief Higgs? Good. Hillary, you're up. Are there questions for Hillary? Thank you. Mr. Sickles.
Very brief update. No construction going on at the moment. Once we get above freezing again, who knows when that'll be for sure, but for a couple, excuse me, for a couple weeks stints, we'll have Fabrizi back in town, but until we're above freezing for a couple weeks or so in a row, they aren't ready to come back. That project will then get wrapped up as soon as they can here in 2025. I can guarantee you it will be going on until after the frosts hit, because that's when they plant grass and things like that. So there'll still be a little bit of work later in the year, but hopefully they can get all the construction part done prior to all that. And when I say later in the year, I'm talking May-ish, like around Mother's Day or so. Mayor already mentioned CDBG. We did not receive that, and I'm just getting that off of the county's website. Went on there and we did not get CDBG funding, but it looks like we did get the CDSG funding, the 50,000 for the Kathy Edwards fence replacement. That's all I have for now. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Sickles, is the master plan pretty much completed and ready to roll?
It is, as far as I understand, it's very close. And the next step will be to make a presentation to all of council. Currently, my team's looking at the March meeting, but that still has to be coordinated with the village and the mayor and things to make sure we can get it on that agenda. If not, it would be the next month. It'd be like April. So
Thank you.
it's very close.
They did a great job. After reading the proposal, like there was really no stone left unturned.
Well, thank
I
you.
thought, I sent an email to everyone saying what a great job I thought they did.
Well, thank you. I'll pass that on.
Mr. Sickles, if there's any money left over on the fence for Kathy Edwards, can we use it to repair fences in the village?
The application was for Kathy Edwards Park.
If there's money, we could get creative.
We have somebody there.
Okay. Anything further for Mr. Sickles? All right, moving on to purchases and approvals. Can I have a motion for the approval of the November 2024 fund cash report?
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Can I have a motion for the approval of the December 2024 fund cash report?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Can I have a motion for the approval of the transfer of permanent parcel numbers 511-12037 and 511-12-038 to the Newburgh Heights Community Improvement Corporation for use in the Newburgh Heights Community Improvement Corporation side lot program in the event said parcels are selected by eligible participants in the CIC side lot program?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Approval for the quote from Planet Technologies for the annual renewal of our Microsoft 365 at a cost not to exceed $13,650.48.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. A motion for the approval of the appointment of Janet Mays as part-time payroll clerk at a starting salary of $21,623.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Is there anything that needs to be added to the agenda?
Nope.
Okay,
We're good.
Doreen sings, I can't hear her. Doreen?
no, I was just told him that he did that, so.
We're good.
Okay. This portion of the meeting, we open the floor to the public for comment. We simply ask that you approach the podium, state your name, and direct your questions at us. You got a question? Yeah, come on.
I guess it's a lot today. Quick question about that whole thing with the government report. So there was a shortfall according to them and you get from over there. was that money appropriated from the city and the city didn't know about it? And if it was, no, but where is the?
I guess, so the question is, I want to make sure I'm stating your question correctly. There was the shortfall from the Garfield court, and that related to what our share of the total court apportionment costs were. When you say appropriated, we have to pay that by obligation. We're responsible for paying that. We didn't know about it, mostly because in the transition between me taking office again and my predecessor leaving, the court really hadn't notified us. Oh, by the way, we were already, what, 3 months into the year when she said, oh, don't forget, you have,
It's not until June that they
Yeah.
share the.
so we were already halfway through the year when they're like,
The money was pulled out of the city.
No, they worked with a deal. They worked with us to create a payment plan to cover those expenses. Yeah.
The other question is about the whole building and
Yeah.
thing. So you were saying in 2 years, you want to come up with a principal amount and then refinance, correct?
That's the hope.
Well, like if I get a 30-year mortgage, I don't get even on my interest payments and principal payments until like 7 years.
Yeah, that's right.
So the bank's always making their nut and then some. In the first 2 years. So really it makes more sense to just try to start paying down principal now, accelerating that instead of, because you're not gonna, what's your interest rate?
So we can't. The terms of the agreement are, right. You're not allowed to refinance or pay. We can take money. That's what that $2 million is that I was talking about making when we refinance in 10 years. It's effectively the same thing. You just can't make advance payments. You have to keep it in our pocket at 10 years. We can refinance the note and then put that against the principal. It's an accelerated payment, just not on a monthly or annual basis.
So you have a 10-year waiting period.
Yeah. That's right.
But are you gonna get a better rate or?
We don't know any of that yet because we don't have any money to put down against a principal. If the math doesn't add up to be beneficial for us, obviously we're not going to do it. So we're a ways away from even exploring that at this stage. Yeah.
That's all I have.
Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions? Meeting's over. No.
We have some neighbors that try to get across the street. Are those spots available?
Yeah. These are all public spots. Yeah. 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 Any more public comment? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Meeting adjourned at 8:15 PM. Thank you.
You gotta suspend the rule in order to pass that. You have to do block.
Okay. We have to wait.
What?
We have to wait 3 readings
For?
for bills.
All right, fine.
Wasn't it?
Compared to University Heights.
Thank you.